My name is Freddy Stark, and on July 14th, 2024, I was 17 years old. I remember the date because the heat in rural Georgia that afternoon wasn't just a temperature, it was a weight. I was out in the back acreage of our property in Franklin Springs, wearing a gray long-sleeve thermal. A stupid choice for a 100-degree day, but I was trying to sweat out a fever I'd been hiding from my mom for 3 days. My head felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, and there was this rhythmic thumping behind my eyes that matched the cicadas screaming in the oak trees. I stood there in the tall, dry grass, looking at the way the light filtered through the branches, feeling utterly detached from my own skin. I wasn't supposed to be out there. I was supposed to be resting, but the restlessness of whatever was brewing in my bloodstream wouldn't let me sit still. I felt a sudden, sharp spike of heat in my chest, like I'd swallowed a coal. I tried to take a deep breath, but my lungs felt stiff, refusing to expand. That's when the world started to tilt. The vibrant green of the field began to bleed into a muddy, desaturated gray. I reached out to grab a low-hanging branch, but my hand didn't seem to belong to me anymore. It moved in slow motion, trailing through the air like it was underwater. I let out a shout, or I tried to, but it came out as a strained, jagged grunt. I was terrified, not of dying, but of the sheer, clinical coldness that was suddenly rushing up my legs. The collapse wasn't like the movies. There was no dramatic music. It was just a heavy, silent thud as my knees gave out and my face hit the dirt. I could smell the dried pine needles and the dust. I tried to roll over, but my nervous system had just quit. I lay there, staring at a single blade of grass an inch from my eye, watching a small black ant crawl across it. My heart was doing something frantic and irregular. A ventricular tachycardia, the doctors would later call it. And then, with one final, agonizingly slow thump, it just stopped. The silence that followed wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of life. I was 17, lying in a field, and I was gone. The transition was instantaneous. 1 second I was pressed into the Georgia red clay, and the next, I was hovering about 8 feet above the ground. The first thing I noticed wasn't the light or some tunnel, it was the silence. The cicadas were gone. The wind had stopped. I looked down and saw myself. It was the most uncomfortable thing I've ever experienced, seeing that boy in the gray shirt, his face pale and slack against the earth. I looked small. I looked like a discarded piece of clothing. I didn't feel peace yet. I felt an intense, clinical curiosity. I could see the sweat stains on the back of my shirt and the way my left foot was tucked awkwardly under my right calf. Then, the scene shifted. I wasn't in the field anymore. I was in the back of an ambulance, though I don't remember the journey there. I was watching a paramedic named Sarah. I saw her name tag, pressed 2 fingers into the side of my neck. She looked tired. There was a smudge of blue ink on her thumb. I watched her look at the monitor, then at her partner, a guy with a shaved head who was prepping the defibrillator paddles. "He's V-fib," she said, her voice sounding like it was coming through a thick glass wall. "Charging to 200. I watched my own body jump when the current hit. It was a violent, ugly movement. My arms flopped like a doll's. I wanted to tell them to stop, not because I wanted to die, but because the effort seemed so messy and desperate from where I was standing. I was hovering near the fluorescent lights of the ceiling, noticing the thin layer of dust on top of the cardiac monitor. It's strange what you focus on when you're clinically dead. I wasn't thinking about my soul. I was thinking about the fact that I'd left my browser history open on my laptop at home and how my mom would find it. The paramedics worked with a grim, practiced rhythm. "Nothing," the guy said, checking the line. Again, 360. Another jolt. Another silence. I watched them start manual compressions, the sound of my sternum popping echoing in that small, metallic space. It was a cold, hard reality. I was a medical emergency, a code blue in transit, and the person I used to be was rapidly becoming a memory. The clinical chaos of the ambulance didn't fade. It was simply overwritten. One moment, I was staring at the smudge of ink on Sarah's thumb as she compressed my chest, and the next, the metal walls of the vehicle dissolved into a vast, heavy stillness. I wasn't in a tunnel, and there weren't any pearly gates. I was standing in what felt like a hallway made of shadows and soft, amber light, but it had the architectural weight of a cathedral. The air here didn't feel like oxygen. It felt like intention. Every breath I took, if I was even breathing. Felt like I was inhaling a memory. That's when I saw him. He wasn't glowing with a blinding, cinematic radiance that hid his features. He was just there. He was wearing a dark, coarse tunic, looking more like a laborer than a king, and he was leaning against a stone pillar as if he'd been waiting for me to finish a long, pointless walk. His face was weathered, with deep lines around his eyes that suggested he'd spent a lifetime squinting into the sun. When he looked at me, I didn't feel judged. I felt known. It was an invasive, terrifying kind of intimacy. He knew about the $20 bill I'd swiped from my dad's dresser 3 weeks ago, and he knew exactly why I'd stayed out in that field trying to sweat out a fever instead of asking for help. "Freddy," he said. His voice wasn't a booming roar. It was a low, resonant frequency that I felt in my teeth. It sounded like the tectonic plates of the earth shifting. He didn't say, "Welcome home," or "It's not your time." He just looked at me with a profound, weary kind of compassion. I looked down at my hands. I was still wearing the gray thermal shirt from the field, but it was clean now, the sweat and Georgia clay gone. The silence between us stretched out, but it wasn't awkward. It was the silence of a courtroom right before the verdict is read. I wanted to look away, to find a door or a way back to that cramped, noisy ambulance, but I couldn't move. I was pinned by the gravity of his gaze. I realized then that I wasn't there for a tour of heaven. I was there because something was coming, and I was being forced to look at it before I was sent back to face it. Jesus stepped away from the pillar and walked toward me. He didn't float. His sandals made a distinct scuff-scuff sound on the stone floor. He reached out and touched my shoulder, and suddenly, the hallway wasn't a hallway anymore. It was a window. He was showing me things, but they weren't metaphors. They were snapshots of a world I recognized, but didn't want to inhabit. "You're going back, Freddy," he said, his eyes fixed on mine. "But you aren't going back to the same world you left. There are 5 signs of a shifting season, and you need to see them so you don't lose your footing when the ground starts to move." He gestured into the air, and a scene flickered into existence like a grainy security feed. I saw a massive modern church, the kind with the coffee shops and the professional lighting rigs. But the pews were empty, not because of a plague, but because the doors were physically chained from the inside. "The first sign," he said, "is the silence of the shepherd. There is a time coming, starting in the winter of 2026, where the voices that used to lead will go quiet out of fear. They will value their tax status over their sheep. You will see men who spoke with fire suddenly speaking in whispers, trying to please a world that has already decided to devour them." The scene shifted. I saw a digital screen, a bank app on a smartphone. The numbers were spinning, fluctuating wildly, then suddenly settling at 0. "The second sign," Jesus continued, "is the weightless currency. People have built their lives on numbers that don't exist. Soon, those numbers will betray them. A man's worth will no longer be found in his digital vault, but in what he can carry and who he can trust. This isn't a judgment, Freddy. It's a consequence. They have worshipped the shadow, and now the shadow is disappearing." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This wasn't a sermon about end times in a distant, dusty book. This was a direct warning about the next few months of my life. He was telling me that the institutions I thought were permanent, the church on the corner, the money in my savings account, were as fragile as the heartbeat I'd just lost in that field. Jesus didn't give me time to process the empty churches or the flickering bank screens. The amber light of the hallway shifted again, thickening into a scene that felt uncomfortably intimate. I was suddenly standing in the corner of a kitchen I knew by heart, my Aunt Sarah's house in Athens. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary was heavy in the air, but the atmosphere was suffocating. My family was sitting around the mahogany table, the same one we'd used for every Thanksgiving since I was 5. But no one was eating. My older brother, Marcus, was staring at his phone, his jaw set so tight I could see the muscle pulsing. My dad was on the other side, his face a mask of weary disappointment. "The third sign," Jesus said, his voice vibrating through the floorboards of that spectral kitchen, "is the fracture of the bloodline. You have been taught that family is the bedrock, but the bedrock is cracking. In the coming months, the line won't be drawn between nations or political parties. It will be drawn through the center of the dinner table. You will see brothers who shared a womb become strangers over a single sentence, a single choice of loyalty. The intimacy of the home is being traded for the validation of the screen. I watched as Marcus suddenly stood up, knocked his chair over, and walked out without a word. My mom just put her head in her hands. It wasn't a blowout fight. It was the cold, quiet death of a relationship. This hit me harder than the financial warnings. This was my life. I saw a text message notification pop up on a phone left on the table. A vitriolic message from an uncle we hadn't spoken to in months, sparked by something as trivial as a social media post. "The spirit of offense is a plague, Freddy," Jesus whispered. "It is the third sign because it removes the only safety net humans have left, each other." When you see families choosing their pride over their people, know that the season of isolation has begun. You will feel this sting personally. You will have to choose between the truth I am giving you and the comfort of being invited to that table. The scene at the kitchen table didn't fade, it fractured. The wood of the table seemed to splinter and dissolve, and suddenly I was looking at a version of my own future. It was a Tuesday morning in October 2026. I saw myself, not the boy in the gray thermal, but a slightly older version of me, sitting in a small, sterile office. I recognized the logo on the door. It was the regional bank where I'd just started an internship. I was looking at a document on a computer screen, a compliance form that required me to sign off on something I knew was a lie, a predatory loan structure hidden in technical jargon. "This is the midpoint, Freddy," Jesus said, standing right behind me in that office. "The fourth sign is the compromise of the bread. There is a time coming where the cost of living will be tied to the cost of your conscience. To keep your seat, to keep your check, to keep your normal, you will be asked to bury what you know is right. Most will do it. They will call it pragmatism. They will call it survival. But it is the fourth sign, the moment the world demands ownership of your integrity in exchange for your security." I felt a sickening drop in my stomach. In the vision, I saw my hand shaking as it hovered over the mouse. I could see my bank balance on the other tab. It was low, dangerously low. I needed that job. I needed the insurance. I saw the face of my manager, a man I respected, leaning in the doorway with a "we're all a team" smile that didn't reach his eyes. "If you sign this, you stay in the light of the world," Jesus said. "If you don't, you step into the cold." This is the personal fracture. You cannot carry the truth and the world's favor in the same hand. It is too heavy for one man. The weight of that choice felt more real than the heart attack in the field. It wasn't an abstract mark. It was a mundane, cubicle-bound betrayal of the soul. The office walls didn't just crumble. They evaporated into a cold, digital mist. I was back in the amber hallway, but the temperature had dropped significantly. Jesus stood a few paces ahead of me, his back turned, looking out into a void that pulsed with a low-frequency hum. It sounded like a million server fans whirring at once. He turned slowly, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something like grief in his eyes. He didn't have to speak for the fifth scene to manifest. It simply bled through the floor. I saw a crowded city street. It looked like Atlanta, near Centennial Park. People were walking, but they weren't looking at each other. They were staring at their wrists, where thin, translucent bands pulsed with a soft, rhythmic blue light. "The fifth sign," Jesus said, his voice now a sharp, clear resonance that cut through the digital hum, "is the consensus of the synthetic. There is a day coming, Freddy, and it begins in the spring of 2027, where the truth will no longer be something you discover, but something that is assigned to you. The world will agree on a lie so completely that to speak the truth will feel like a physical sickness. You will see people trade their intuition for an algorithm and their heartbeat for a data point. This is the sign of the final narrowing. When the collective voice of the world matches perfectly, know that the individual soul has been silenced." He stepped closer, and I felt the air around us vibrate. "Why do I show you this? Because you think you are dying of a heart condition. You aren't. Your heart stopped because the world you were living in was already dead. I am putting a different rhythm in you. These 5 signs are not meant to make you hide in the woods. They are meant to make you unshakable. When the shepherds go silent, when the banks fail, when the family breaks, when the job demands your soul, and when the world agrees on the lie, you will remember this hallway. You will remember that I told you it would happen. That is your anchor. Without it, you will drift with the rest of them into the dark." I looked at him, my breath hitching in my chest. "But why me? Why show a 17-year-old from Georgia these things? What does it change? I asked. I felt small, the gray thermal shirt suddenly feeling heavy and damp again. The title of my own life felt like a headline I couldn't read. Jesus didn't offer a vague metaphor or a comforting pat on the head. He stood tall, and the amber light intensified until it felt like we were standing inside a sun. The title of this encounter, Freddy, is the warning itself. You died so I could show you the 5 signs of the closing door. It happens because the time of leaning on old structures is over. The church as an institution is being shaken so the church as a people can be found. The economy is being stripped so your true provider can be revealed. The family is being fractured so you can find the family of the Spirit. He leaned in, his face inches from mine. What determines the outcome for you isn't the signs themselves, it's your reaction to the 4th sign. The compromise. Most people will see the signs and try to fix the world. You cannot fix a house that is meant to burn. You can only decide what you will carry out of the flames. The outcome is determined by your refusal to sign the document in that office. It is determined by your willingness to sit at a divided table and speak the truth in love, even when it costs you the meal. This is why I appeared, to give you the map before the landscape changes. If I didn't show you, you would think God had abandoned the world. But I am telling you now, I am not abandoning it. I am shaking it until only the things that cannot be shaken remain. The amber light began to pulse like a dying star, and the weight of the atmosphere became crushing. Jesus didn't move, but the space around us started to constrict, drawing inward until I felt like I was back in that vice grip of a headache in the Georgia field. You have seen The Office, Freddy, he said, his voice now sounding like it was vibrating from inside my own skull. You saw your hand hovering over that mouse. You saw the low balance in your bank account and the desperate need to belong. That wasn't just a possible future. That is the pivot point of your entire existence. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of fear, not the biological fear of the ambulance, but a moral terror. I realized that the near-death experience wasn't the hard part. The near-life experience coming afterward was the real gauntlet. What if I'm not strong enough? I whispered. What if I sign it? What if I just want to be normal? I thought of my friends back at Franklin County High, the football games, the Friday nights at the diner, the simple, uncomplicated life of a teenager who didn't have the weight of the world's collapse sitting in his chest. I wanted to trade this heavy, divine knowledge for a cheeseburger and a quiet night's sleep. Jesus didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell me I was a hero. He looked at me with a stark, unsettling honesty. If you sign it, you will have your normal for a season. You will have the house, the car, and the quiet life. But you will be a hollow shell in a world that is already turning to ash. The choice isn't between safety and danger, Freddy. It's between a comfortable lie and a difficult truth. One leads to a slow, suffocating death of the spirit. The other leads through the fire and into the only reality that remains when the blue lights of the world go out. He reached out and placed his hand over my heart. The heart that was currently stopped in a metal box on a Georgia highway. I am giving you the choice now, before you wake up. Do you want the anchor, or do you want the drift? I didn't answer with words. The yes felt like a tectonic shift in my very soul, a commitment to a path I knew would be lonely. The moment the yes formed in my spirit, the amber hallway shattered like a sheet of ice. The transition back was violent, a physical assault on my senses. There was no gentle floating down into my body. It was a sensory explosion of cold, sharp pain, and the smell of ozone. Crack. My chest felt like it had been hit by a sledgehammer. I heard a high-pitched whine, then the frantic, rhythmic beeping of a monitor. I've got a rhythm. We've got a pulse. It was Sarah's voice, but it was no longer muffled by a glass wall. It was screamingly loud, vibrating in my ears along with the roar of the ambulance tires on the asphalt. I tried to gasp, but my throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. Every inch of my skin was cold, a deep, bone-chilling frost that made my muscles lock up. I opened my eyes, and the fluorescent lights of the ambulance ceiling were blinding, searing my retinas. I saw the smudge of ink on Sarah's thumb as she adjusted my oxygen mask. It was exactly as I'd seen it from above, but now the perspective was agonizingly flat and heavy. "Easy, Freddy, easy," the male paramedic said, his hand firm on my shoulder. "You're back. You had a hell of a scare, kid." I tried to speak, to tell them about the 5 signs, the empty churches, and the office in 2026, but all that came out was a weak, wet cough. My body felt like a suit that didn't fit anymore. Too tight, too heavy, and incredibly fragile. As they wheeled me into the emergency room at Ty Cobb Regional, the chaos of the hospital felt like a staged play. The nurses running, the clatter of the gurney, the smell of antiseptic. It all felt thin, like papier-mâché. I lay there, my heart thumping a jagged, artificial beat, and all I could think about was the scuff of sandals on a stone floor. I was back in the world, but the world I had returned to was already starting to fray at the edges, and I was the only one in the room who could see the threads pulling loose. The recovery wasn't a miracle. It was a slow, grueling climb. For weeks, the walls of my bedroom in Franklin Springs felt like a cage. My parents treated me like I was made of spun glass, whispering in the hallway about myocarditis and viral triggers. They didn't know that the physical pain was nothing compared to the mental static. Every time I turned on the news or scrolled through my phone, I looked for the cracks Jesus had shown me. I stayed silent about the vision for a long time, terrified that if I spoke it aloud, the weight of it would stop my heart again. But then, the first confirmation arrived, and it didn't come with a thunderclap. It came in a plain white envelope. It was mid-August, just a month after I'd died. My dad sat at the kitchen table, the same table from my vision, holding a letter from our local church, the one where he'd been a deacon for 15 years. His face was gray. The letter was a formal notice that the board was restructuring the community outreach program to align with new local directives. In plain English, they were shutting down the food pantry and the street ministry because the city had hinted at pulling their zoning permits if they kept hosting unregulated gatherings. I watched my dad's hands shake. "They're just giving up, Freddy," he whispered. "They didn't even put up a fight. They're afraid of the paperwork." I felt a cold stone drop into my stomach. It was the silence of the shepherd. It wasn't 2026 yet, but the rot was already there, hidden behind the fresh paint and the Sunday morning smiles. I walked out to the back field, the place where I'd collapsed, and looked at the grass. It had grown back thick and green, covering the spot where my face had hit the dirt. The world looked normal, but the air felt different. It felt like the moments before a massive storm, when the birds stop singing and the sky turns a bruised, sickly purple. I wasn't crazy. The map was real. By the time 2026 actually rolled around, I had managed to build a life that looked successful on the surface. I was 20 years old, working that internship at the regional bank I'd seen in the amber hallway. I walked into the office every morning with a pit in my stomach, waiting for the day the screen would match the vision. I'd become a master of blending in, keeping my head down and my mouth shut, but the anchor Jesus had placed in my heart never stopped vibrating. Then came the Tuesday morning in October, the day the mist finally cleared. My manager, Mr. Henderson, called me into his office. He didn't look like a villain. He looked like a guy who was worried about his mortgage. He slid a digital tablet across the desk. "Freddy, we need you to finalize this standardization protocol for the new housing block. It's just a formality. It basically says the applicants have cleared the social stability audit." I looked at the screen. These weren't credit scores. These were community alignment metrics. Lists of people being denied loans because they had attended unauthorized religious gatherings or expressed divisive views online. I saw the names. One of them was my high school football coach. "Just tap, accept, Freddy," Henderson said, leaning in with that same team player smile I'd seen in the vision 2 years prior. I looked at my hand. It was hovering over the screen, exactly as I'd seen it. The room felt suddenly silent, the hum of the office air conditioning fading into that deep, cathedral-like frequency from the hallway. I knew that if I tapped that screen, my life would stay easy. I'd get the promotion. I'd stay normal. But I could feel the coarse fabric of a dark tunic against my memory. I didn't give a speech. I didn't quote scripture. I just looked at Henderson, stood up, and left my badge on the desk. I walked out of the building and into the bright, cold October sunlight. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank app. Account status, under review. My stomach did a slow, sick roll, but my heart, the one that had stopped in a Georgia field, beat with a steady, unbreakable rhythm. I looked down at the pavement and saw a single, dried pine needle trapped in the wiper blade of my car. It was small, fragile, and completely out of place in the city. I felt the cold wind pick up, biting through my shirt. The door had closed, just like he said it would. I was broke, I was jobless, and for the first time since I died, I was finally awake. If this message felt important, it probably was. There are more stories like this, and they only get deeper. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next one, because some warnings aren't meant to be ignored.